In this lesson, we're going to continue with top-down and layout techniques. I'm going to start with creating a new sketch in the layout to drive holes in this assembly. These holes will be for mounting holes. I've got 3 plates, so the top plate will have to get a counterbore hole, the mid plate will get a clearance hole, and the bottom plate will get a threaded hole. First, though, where do we place the layout sketch? You might be tempted to place the layout sketch on the very top part. Remember, a layout sketch is a sketch that's in the context of the assembly, not in the part. If the sketch lays on the part, that means the sketch is dependent on the part, and then it's also dependent on all of the mates in order for SOLIDWORKS to completely calculate its position. So one of the things that you want to make sure of with a layout sketch is that it is not dependent on anything else. And that is to say that you should only use items that are above the sketch in the feature manager. Now you could create an additional plane and sketch on that. If you really wanted this new layout sketch to be above these parts rather than down in the middle of them where the top plane is, then this is how you would have to do it. Click on the top plane, grab the plane, and drag it up. Now you could edit this dimension so that it is exactly at the same place where the face of the top part would be. But you don't want to make a relationship between the new plane and the top part. It's probably a good idea to also reorder this plane so it comes before the sketches. So with that plane now created, I can open a new sketch here, and I'm just going to create a rectangle and select everything, or right-click and select chain, and use the for construction option. This allows me to very easily position the 4 points for this circle. I'll make this 1.5, and if I make these two the same length, then I've described 4 points on a circle. So now I can sketch in 4 circles. And remember, this is all being done in a sketch that's in the assembly rather than a sketch that's in any of the parts. I'll select all 4 of the parts, set them equal to one another, and apply a dimension. Now this new sketch should also be reordered. It shows up at the bottom of the tree, but you don't have to keep it there. As long as you haven't created any relationships to any of the parts in the assembly, then that sketch can be moved to the top of the tree. Remember that you always want your relationships to go one direction. You want the relationships to go from the top of the tree to the bottom of the tree. So, for example, creating a relationship between this sketch and one of the parts would be a bad idea, especially if you then turned around and used that sketch to drive one of the parts. Then you have what we call the circular relationship, where A depends on B and B depends on A. So you get yourself into a situation that's a bit of a logical loop. Now the next step I want to use here is to use the hole series feature. SOLIDWORKS is giving us a message, so we ought to read it. Sketch the location for new holes or select existing holes to use as the start, middle, or end series. Use the Property Manager tabs to size the start, middle, and end holes. Add hardware using the Smart Fasteners tab if you have SOLIDWORKS Toolbox. So we're going to create new holes for this operation. And the 4 new holes I'm going to create are going to be centered at these points. From here, I'll establish the size and type of hole. I want a counterbore hole, 3/8 of an inch for a socket head cap screw. This is on the first part. The middle parts will all get clearance holes, and these holes will be sized based on the original start hole. The final hole will be either a through hole if you're going to place a washer and nut, or a straight tap. And so now we'll press OK. I'm going to place 4 holes first, and then we'll come back and put them in the right locations. We've got the 4 holes down now. Hit escape on the keyboard and drag these onto the corners of the sketched rectangle. And now we'll make relations with these center holes so that the relationships are along Y. These are 3D sketches, and the holes are on the faces of the parts, but the sketch is not. Once we have the positions established, now we select this type, which is counterbore, and we'll get a 3/8 hole for a socket head cap screw. This is the start hole specification, so this is the hole in the first part. The middle hole will be any number of middle plates, and this size is always a clearance hole based on the start hole specification. And the end hole, I'm going to use a tapped hole instead of a through hole. The clearance through hole would be used if you had a washer and a nut on the far end. And I'll select this end component and click OK. SOLIDWORKS has added a hole feature to the assembly, but it has also added hole features to each of the individual parts. These are in-context features that are controlled by the overall assembly feature. If you want to go back and edit this, you'll need to do so in the context of the assembly. So let's take a section down through this and see what types of holes we got. We got a counterbore and clearance hole, a clearance hole, and a tapped hole.